In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit.
Hobbits were small creatures, about 3 foot high.
They like leading unadventurous lives, having plenty to eat, and being sure of coming back to their nice warm hobbit holes and having friends to tea.
They're not a kind of people given to great adventure or to thought.
But some members of the hobbit race have a strain in them which they don't really like to admit to, which is rather adventurous. And so occasionally hobbits go out on wild adventures.
It's finally the old basic thing which must have occurred often in literature, the reluctant hero. And the story, in essence, is the adventures of this little chap. Then, of course, you move out into the wilder world where the imagination can be let go. The actual beginning, though it's not really the beginning, but the actual flash point was, I remember very clearly. I can still see the corner in my house in 20 Northmore Road where it happened. I got an enormous pile of exam papers there, and marking school examinations in the summertime is an enormous, very laborious, and unfortunately also boring. And I remember picking up a paper and actually finding. I nearly gave an extra mark for it, extra 5 marks actually. There was one page on this particular paper was left blank. Glorious. Nothing to read, so I scribbled on it. I can't think why. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. I think that was eventually published in 1937. I now wanted to try my hand at writing a really stupendously long narrative and to see whether I had sufficient art, cunning, or material to make a really long narrative which would hold the average reader right through. The best, one of the best forms for a long narrative is, as was found in The Hobbit, though there's a much more elaborate form, of the pilgrimage on journey with an object. So that was inevitably the form I adopted.
Frodo began to feel restless, and the old paths seemed too well trodden. He looked at maps and wondered what lay beyond their edges. He took to wandering further afield, and more often by himself. He used often to say there was only one road, that it was like a great river. Its springs were at every doorstep, and every path was its tributary.
I am the verger of Merton College. The college itself is the oldest college in Oxford.
Hello, chap, what are you doing down there?
Oh, that's the entrance to the office at the bottom. Above it, you have the Queen's Room, where Queen Henrietta... So it's actually, the office, of course, is to do with the Estates Office, you know, where they deal with all the estates belonging to the college.
I see.
And here's the bursar just coming across.
She's missing. It's very helpful.
Yeah. And there, through the door, their sharp right, of course, is the State's Office. Quite a modern little fellow.
It's a pity the book didn't catch on a bit sooner, isn't it? I was, on the whole, a rather puny, over-mothered, timid little creature who got up to very English and extremely British parents. I think it was a kind of double coming home, which made the effect of the ordinary English meadows, countryside, at breaks so immensely important to me. It was not much of a success. I eventually became a fairly ordinary scholar. Turned out to be good at rugby football, of all odd things. Let me say at once that owing to the casualties in the war, there is, I think, so very few people to elect. too big a job for me, really. Which means to say that I was legally removed. It's a pity it couldn't be in the springtime when that tree that wouldn't look sad, but covered with leaves, you see. Look old but not sad. And these that looks like kind of plain, doesn't it? Something. Whatever that tree is, and these are limes. But all the limes have such a, however old they are, they're lovely green in spring. I have always, for some reason, I don't know why, been enormously attracted by trees. All my works is full of trees. I suppose I have actually, in some simple-minded form of longing, actually would like to. I should have liked to be able to make contact with a tree and find out what it feels about things. And the old Ent says a few things, doesn't it, about feeling the sap run up and the opening to the sun. Trees, and a lot of trees have gone, big trees from there, you see. It was much more woody, and there was a long line of trees, this kind only younger, all along the wall, so those houses couldn't see you and you couldn't see them when they were in leaf.
Yes.
It was a much more secluded garden.
Can't get out. There's a great damn thing in the way. I'll try and try that, won't I?
In this world, Tolkien has placed different countries, different races, different languages, and he has given it all a sense of solidity.
Well, I think it's a very basic appeal, because everybody likes a fantasy. They like to escape from life when it becomes dull and boring. And you can get this kind of escape through detective thrillers and science fiction stories and spy stories. But you always come back to the real world, thinking that it's even duller and more boring than it was before. And you think, I wish I was the first man on the moon, or I wish I was a spy instead of leading the kind of life I'm leading. Whereas when you finish reading The Lord of the Rings, not only have you had a marvellous adventure story and a marvellous fantasy, but some of the magic has rubbed off on the ordinary, very homely things of life, like a good meal.
Food? Never been a trencherman. I admire trenchermen, therefore I make... But I like, I must say, since England produces the best basic food in Europe, on the whole, it does. Yes, I drink things with tea. I like, of course, feeling elevated, but I'm very fond of beer. I've always smoked. I sometimes smoke beyond the point when you enjoy it, which is silly, but I do smoke and enjoy it, and as a matter of fact, it's now so tied to writing that I can't write without it.
That's a good one. Look at the height of
Hey! I don't live in America. Surely they should tell me. I should like to ask them some questions of how such things arise. I observe in general that North America has always been much more easily kindled than England, or indeed any country in Europe. And for instance, the Dickens cult and the extraordinary excitement about Dickens. So the only people who came down to the quay to watch the mail ship coming, the only thing they wanted to know is what happened to the next chapter. They weren't worried about goods. I can judge from my very considerable fan mail. I should say that only a small proportion I possess, and even of those, not very many have really read the books with any attention.
I think perhaps when he started off writing Lord of the Rings, as he is a philologist and an academic, he was most interested in the language. But the world that he created to hold the language took him over?
I first began seriously to invent languages about when I was 13 or 14. I've never stopped, really. Languages have a flavour to me, which I never understand people saying, for instance, it was awfully dry and dull, because a new language to me is just like taking a new wine or a new sweetmeat or something. What I'm doing now is to try and write in Elvish, but I'm saying my writing is very inferior to the Elv. Their standard greeting when meeting: a star shines upon our meeting. Oh, Lord. I made a mistake, didn't I? And that stands for Ellen, Sila, Lumen, Aumenti Elvo. It's a rather beautiful language, I think. It's impossible to give the story, any story that's worthwhile, in a couple of sentences. It is meant to be escapist, because I use escapism in its proper sense. It was a man getting out of prison. People do not fully understand the difference between an allegory and an application. You can go to a Shakespeare play and you can apply it to things in your mind, if you like, but they're not allegories. At least most of them are not. There's more allegorical elements, for instance, in the Tempest than in most, but certainly, I mean, many people apply to nuclear, the ring, to particularly the nuclear bomb, don't they? And think that was in my mind, the whole thing is only an allegory of it. Well, it isn't.
No other book has frightened me quite as much as that. I've never had such an intense sense of evil.
One reviewer once said, "This is a jolly, jolly book, isn't it? All the right boys come home and they're happy and glad." It isn't true, of course. He can't have read the story.
Tolkien uses the ordinary things that people are afraid of, and he's built up these fears into an immense evil atmosphere.
If you really come down to any large story, it interests people, can hold them attention for a considerable time, or make stories, practically always, a human story is practically always about one thing, aren't they? Death. The inevitability of death. I don't know, would you agree with that? But anyway, that is what, there was a quotation from Simon Beauvoir that I read in the paper the other day, which seems to me put it in a nutshell. I think I'll read it. It was apropos of the untimely death of a musical composer whom I've myself always been extremely fond, Carl Maria Weber, who died 39 of tuberculosis. And the man who written his biography actually quotes these words of Simon: "There is no such thing as a natural death. Nothing that happens to man is ever natural, since his presence calls the whole world into question. All men must die, but for every man his death is an accident, and even if he knows it and consents to it, an unjustifiable violation." Well, you may agree with the words or not, but those are the key spring of the laws of the ring.